G'day. I wonder if you can imagine this situation. I'm driving down Northern Road. It's fairly busy and I need to do a right turn. I get distracted and miss my turn. So I decided I'd just do a quick U at the M4 intersection. It's completely safe. Off I go. And then I start hearing sirens. I wonder what the emergency is. The sirens are getting closer. A police officer pulls me over. Do you know you can't do a U-turn at that intersection? Well, yes, but I'm pretty sure it was safe. When I decided to turn when I want, then I'm not just breaking the law, I'm actually declaring autonomy. I'm setting up myself as the ruler of my car. I'm the ruler of this road. I'm declaring myself King Tom of the Kia. I'm now making myself a little guide. I now make up my own rules in my own car. I draw the lines. Let me take it a bit further. King Tom of the Kia wants a beer as he drives along. I can cope with more than one beer. I'll have two, maybe three. Give me another one, please. I'll have four, 5, 6, as I drive along down this road. See, I decide I am King Tom of the Kia. I make up the rules. I draw the lines. You may not be able to handle 6 beers and I drive, but in my car, I can. See, what I've done and what other people have done is they've actually effectively said, I make up the laws. I am a self-ruler. I am autonomous. That's what autonomous means. Autonomos, self-rule, self-law. Now, I don't know if you've thought about this, but essentially that is what we've said to God. We want to be the rulers. God will decide what's right. We'll decide what's wrong. Last time we were together, we looked at page 1 of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1. We saw a loving God, a maker, a creator who is unique and supreme, a God who creates effortlessly by his word, who created in an orderly, patterned, deliberate way, who created a world that is good. And we saw our place in God's creation, made in his image, given privilege and given the task of ruling his world under him. And we saw last time that there were guidelines from God on how we're to do this. Genesis 2, freedom to eat from any tree in the garden, but not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And we pick up the story this time, here's the difficulty. As soon as we're told there's one thing we're not to do, one thing we're not to eat, guess what our focus is on? It's on that, isn't it? For we don't like the idea that someone else is in charge. The next thing that happens in the story of God and his world is that we, encouraged by the serpent, the devil, declare autonomy. We declare self-rule. Let's look at it. Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. Now, the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, We may eat from the trees in the fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say you must not eat from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die. You will certainly not die, the serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Well, that sounds good. I'd like to be like God. I'd like to know God, good and evil. Verse 6, when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for obtaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. It wasn't just eating an apple. I mean, there's no mention of apple there. What was it then to eat? Well, it was a declaration of autonomy, just like King Tom of the Kia. In reaching out and eating the fruit from the tree that God had forbidden, when Adam does this, he's taking God's wisdom on his own terms. They're snatching from God the wisdom. They take it on and they decide for themselves that what God says is best is not best. See, that's what they're saying. See, up until then, Adam had trusted God. He'd accepted the good things that God, his creator, had given him. But at this point, he declares that he knows better. It's a quest for independence. It's a quest for self-rule. It's a quest for freedom, for autonomy. They are reaching out and grasping what God has kept from them. They're saying they don't want to live under God's rules anymore. They don't want to they don't want to take his rules. They want to make up their own rules. Then they're asserting their ability to self-legislate. They're asserting human autonomy. They're setting themselves up as autonomous little gods. Now, these declarations aren't just about preference. See, speed limits, drinking while you're driving, lying, stealing, pedophilia. Friends, it's because there is a God, a creator standing over this world, that there are such things as right and wrong, good and evil. All of them are symptoms of our declarations of independence, our declaration of autonomy, our statement of rebellion. Adam's autonomy was our autonomy. Now, important point, when Adam ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, when Adam declared autonomy, you and I were there with him. Those of us with a Western mindset, we have difficulties with this because we think in very individualistic categories, because under Adam, we bear the responsibility for our declaration of autonomy with God. Now, as a Westerner, I'm tempted to think that I'm only responsible for what I've done. I'm just an individual, but I am actually part of a whole. For example, in the Second World War, when Britain went to war against Germany, Britain's Prime Minister at the time, Winston Churchill, told the nation, "We shall fight them on the beaches, we shall fight them on the landing grounds, and on the fields and on the streets, so we shall fight them in the hills, we shall never surrender." And the people of Great Britain were right there with Churchill, at war with Germany. And here, the Australian Prime Minister, Robert Menzies, stood up and said, "Great Britain has declared war upon Germany. And as a consequence, Australia is also at war." And the people of Australia were right there with Menzies and Churchill at war with Germany. It wasn't just Menzies' war, it wasn't just Churchill's war, it was the whole of Great Britain's war. It was the whole of Australia's war. It was all of our war. See, I'm not just an individual, I'm also part of a whole. When Adam declares autonomy against God, he acts as our leader. And we're not just individuals, we're part of the whole, right there with Adam, declaring autonomy against God. That's every one of us, the oldest to the youngest. We're born autonomous, at odds with God. Now, this seemingly simple and unimpressive act actually explains a lot as we look at the world around us. When it comes to questions of why, and remember, this is the question we're answering, why do bad things happen? Why is there suffering? This passage begins but doesn't give a complete answer to this question. Because what we've seen here is that we live in a broken world full of broken people. There are consequences for declaring autonomy. There's a break in relationship in 3 places that weren't there before. Let me just go through each of those one by one. Firstly, there's a consequence of declaring our autonomy for our relationship with each other. You see that at Genesis 3, verse 7. First, in regards to our relationships with each other, we're no longer at peace with each other. We're no longer, but we're now at odds with each other. See, in the beginning, there is this beautiful picture of life in God's world. The last line of Genesis 2 was Genesis 2:25. The man and his wife were both naked and they felt no shame. And it's a beautiful picture. There's no shame. Total peace in the relationship. They're perfectly open with each other. No advantage taken. We were living God's way. God was in charge of determining what was good, what was evil. There was no need for clothes. There was no way for anyone. There was no way that anyone would take advantage of one another. There were no insecurities. But now, there are autonomous people, self-law people, making their own rules, who may abuse, prey on the vulnerable, however they like, because they're making up their own rules. So after we've eaten from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, now verse 7 of chapter 3, verse 7, then the eyes of both of them were opened and they realized that they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. The once perfect relationship, naked and no shame before God, now has a fracture. It has a rupture. God's beautiful world has been vandalized. Now, all of us have been victims of other people's brokenness. I don't have to convince you that people hurt other people. You know it, I know it. It's what we see every day all around us on the news. Stories of tragedies, of drunk drivers ploughing into kids, of murder, of poverty, of greed, of selfishness, of neglect of each other. If you've ever wondered why bad things happen, here's part of the Bible's answer. Bad things happen because we're broken people, living autonomously, all trying to do our own thing in our time, at our pace. We're autonomous creatures who refuse to live under God's rule, and the result is suffering. But there's more. Not only did this act mean that our relationship with each other is damaged, our relationship to the world is fractured. We will not rule it like God would have us do. As a result, our earth has fallen into disrepair. There are earthquakes, tsunamis, viruses. All these natural disasters point us back to the idea that the world isn't right. These things shouldn't happen. Do you ever feel that? It's just not right. But they do, over and over again, like a stark reminder each time that things just aren't right. The Bible's explanation is that autonomy has entered and disrupted God's good world, his good relationships with each other. Now, you may think this answer to the why of suffering is incomplete, and there's a sense in which it is. I don't think any major religion or worldview gives you a total answer. But here's what we need to weigh up. What's your answer? Which satisfies you more? Which one can you trust? Because atheism's answer to these questions, personally, and it's probably no surprise here, but personally it leaves me cold. As Richard Dawkins says, in a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt. Other people are going to get lucky, and we don't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties that we should expect if there is at the bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. That's Richard Dawkins. To me, this view is unlivable. This isn't a position that produces a society I want to be part of. I want people to care. I want justice to come. I want rhyme and reason. And even the person who is fiercely committed to atheism will cry out in the face of a tragedy in their own family. The problem of suffering is a problem for the Christian, but a greater problem, logically, for the non-believer. Where does that sense of justice come from? What basis does the atheist judge have for something is wrong, unjust, or unfair? What basis does an atheist lawmaker have for determining that? For those who have abandoned God as an answer to this question will leave you with a bigger problem than sticking with God. The atheist answer is just unlivable. If you want to dig some more on this, please get hold of the book by John Dixon, If I Were God, I'd End All the Pain. Lastly, most importantly, there is a fracture, not only just with people and with our world, but with God. See verse 8 there, chapter 3, verse 8. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord among the trees of the garden. I used to live at peace with God, but now I'm hiding behind a tree. What does that say to you, right? And God is actually angry with our autonomy, our rebellion, our treason. It's not an impersonal matter. He takes it personally. And when I thumb my nose at him, when I ignore his guidelines and write my own rules, look at verse 9. But the Lord God called to the man, "Where are you?" Verse 10, he answered, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." And he said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree I commanded you not to eat from?" Verse 12, the man said, "The woman you put me here with, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and then I ate." Then the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." Now, God's been clear about his expectations, and God's expectations have been defied, and God is angry. And God, when we declare autonomy, is angry. And God is not feeble, God holds them accountable, and the perpetrators feel the force of his anger. Is it right for a loving God to be angry? Well, yes. Is to be angry somehow below God, beneath God? No. Get this, the opposite of love is not anger. The opposite of love is indifference. See, God does care. And God does two things in light of his anger. He installs a king and he promises to crush all evil. Come with me to Psalm 2. So Psalm 2 is set 1000 BC, 3,000 years ago. The capital is Israel. And now God has given his people a king called King David. And there has been this question all along: what is God going to do about the autonomy problem? How is God going to fix this problem of self-rule? And there are hopes that King David might be the one who God will use to deal with the rebellion, to deal with autonomy, to put things right in the universe. I want to look at the document that was written to mark David's installation as king. It's a poem, really. It's a psalm. And it paints a picture of what we've seen: humanity in full autonomy, people in independence and a quest for freedom from God. And God is angry, rightfully so. Creatures in rebellion against their creator, things must be put right. And so God installs a king. God appoints his chosen king in verses 6 to 9. Well, what happens? Have a look at verse 6. I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. Now, to our Western mindset, this is weird. For all over the Western world, kings or kings to be are not particularly impressive. Why don't we have a monarchy? Because we know that, well, power corrupts. And so a king who can actually do something, in our experience, they're always corrupt. So that would get stuck. But why does God appoint a king? Well, God's king is a person who would rule God's earth properly. Someone not declaring autonomy, someone who will live God's own way, someone who will act in God's interest, someone who will put things right in God's world again, someone who will deal with autonomy, a ruler who will restore order to God's vandalized world. This king, it tells us in verses 7-8, will have God as his father and have great authority. God will cause autonomous people to be obedient to his king. There will be no more rebel nations, no more rebel people, no more rebel creatures in the Creator's creation. Implication? When this king rules, evil will be overturned. And don't we want that? In our heart of hearts, don't we want that? No longer will we see the vandalized world, but a good and perfect and right world. It's the promise of an end to war. You want that, don't you? Aren't you, like me, sickened by economic policies that we know are unjust, sickened by drug trafficking that ruins people's lives, sickened by the exploitation and using of people, sickened by the violence and degradation of women, appalled by gang rape, shocked at the anarchy, the looting, the destruction of cities after national disasters, horrified at the man who kept 3 women captive in his basement for 3 years as his slave, sickened by the bashing and the brutality, the crying out for an end to war. We're crying out, aren't we, for that end. I want a king who will put this right. I want God to appoint a king who will finally deal with evil, whatever the cost. It's going to be difficult to deal with evil. How will he do it? Have a look at verse 9. What will the king do? You will break them with a rod of iron. You will dash them to pieces like pottery. You picture it: all autonomy, all evil, all using, all abusing, all rape, all wrong, every bit of uprising, autonomy, vandalism of God's beautiful world. And God's king takes his rod of iron, his scepter, and crushes it. Let me take my rod of iron the Australian rod of iron, um, uh, and a bit of pottery, a dinner plate. This is what he does. It goes smash. The king is perfect, after God's heart. And the king with God hates evil. And the king will crush rebellion. Evil is shattered. Well, evil people are crushed. I've got to ask you, how do you feel about that? Well, part of me that is angry with the bad people wants that. I want an end to the destruction of war. I long for a day when evil is dealt with, when the world will be beautiful again, when that vandalism that tears apart our society is done away with, when people will live at peace with God and with each other. And I know it can only come with the complete crushing of evil people. But on the other hand, I'm incredibly nervous. Because while in the abstract, in principle, I want an end to evil, for me there's a difficulty. Because the problem is us. Because in the problem of autonomy and its consequences of vandalism and war, I'm not innocent. I'm part of the problem. The part of the problem is me. It's not just the drug pushers, the rapists, the autonomous rebels. It's me, it's you. Because I've at points lived and acted against God, lived and acted against the society. There are things that I've done that I'm not going to share with you because I'm embarrassed about them. I'm ashamed of them. And so if God is to deal with all wrong, all evil, the way things stand, then I'm on the wrong side of the iron, the bat. Friends, I'm imagining that I could be wrong, that you might be here today and you're surprised at the God that we're seeing here. You came along to these set of talks introducing God and said, Tom, I'll walk in your worldview. I'll have a look at the worldview of the Bible. And as we've journeyed together, it might be that the God you've seen is not the God you wished was there. Perhaps the God you wish was there isn't the God of justice. Perhaps he isn't the one that today we've met, who is a God of justice, the God who cannot and will not let evil go unchecked. But we've also seen today that there will be, and there'll be more of this next week, but that God is also a God of love and justice. Love and justice that God lovingly provides a way out for. So please stick with me as we look at how God provides a way out. You see something of that in this psalm. I just want to underline this as perhaps the most important thing that I say today. I want you to see the last 9 words of this psalm because they hint at this God of love who points a way out. The words say this: blessed are those who take refuge in him. We should take refuge in him. We should run to him. There's no refuge from God's king when God's king crushes evil, when God's king crushes autonomy. There's no place to hide when God's appointed king crushes evil. There's no place, there's no refuge from him, no place to hide from him, but there's a marvelous promise of refuge in him. See, I deserve to be crushed, but God offers safety. And it's not because I deserve it, it's because God loves me and is merciful, and God lovingly provides his mercy in his King. And we'll see this spectacularly pulled off next week, and we'll need to wait till then to have a look at it. But for today, let me just say, the love and mercy of God only makes sense against the backdrop of the justice of God. And so we'll come together next week and see how God's appointed king, not King David, but King Jesus, pulls off both the justice and the mercy. I'll see you then.